Next up, we are honored to have with us Mr. Banmali Agrawala, Senior Advisor at TATA Sons Private Limited. To welcome and introduce Sir, I call upon my colleague, Mr. Bala Satkuranathan.
Good evening to everyone. Mr. Banmali Agrawala is currently Senior Advisor at TATA Sons Private Limited. He joined TATA Sons as President, Infrastructure, Defense and Aerospace in October 2017, in his second tenure with the Indian conglomerate. He is the Chairman of Tata Electronics Private Limited, Tata Advanced Systems Private Limited, and Tata Realty and Infrastructure Limited. Mr. Agrawala is a veteran in the energy and manufacturing space, having led GE and Wärtsilä in India previously. He is an active member of the Confederation of Indian Industries, that is CII, and sits on the boards of US-India Business Council and Pratham Education Foundation. Mr. Agrawala is a mechanical engineer by training and an alumnus of the Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School. Thank you, sir. We are honored to have you with us here. May I now invite you to the stage for sharing your views on India's markets and economy in 2024.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Chairman Mr. Aligappan, the members of the board of the United Way, distinguished guests, Ambassador Gokhale, Mr. Munot, it's indeed a privilege to be here. I was just going through the list of speakers who've been here, who've presented themselves earlier in the past, and it's indeed a very daunting, routine to follow. And particularly after Mr. Gokhale, I was just talking to Maha over there and say, how does one follow Mr. Gokhale after his phenomenal worldview? So let me try and take the easy way out, which is, let me try and share with you a perspective of a practicing manager on the ground in terms of how do we see the economy going, the opportunities, and what is it perhaps that we should be doing. To begin with, I think, at least from a business standpoint, we seems to be all guns blazing as far as India is concerned. Even for us within the Tata Group, which is a fairly widespread group, as you know, at an aggregate level, we've been growing at more than 20% over the last 3 years, year on year. And that, mind you, is on a base of roughly over $130, $140 billion of sales. That growth is not coming just from any singular industry, but it is widespread. That growth is not coming just from the urban cities and so on, but it's going down to tier 2 and tier 3 cities as well. So we feel that the growth that India has to offer, that we are seeing in our numbers, is here to stay. And there is something structural that has changed in the economy, which is making India a far more resilient and a sustainable economy. I can also say that almost on a daily basis, if not every alternate day, we get at least one call a day from somewhere in the world to say that, can we come to India, can we work with you to exploit and to make most of the opportunity that India has to offer. I don't think in the recent past or in many years, we have seen corporate performance, the performance of the banks, and the finances of the country all so well aligned at the same time. I would just sum this up to say that I don't think we've had it as good from an economy point of view as we have it now. So if we have to move from here, then what is it that we see? I would argue that from a business point of view, we and the whole world perhaps sees 3 significant transitions taking place. The first is the energy transition. Clearly, we are all aware of the sustainability challenge, the environmental challenges. I think it escapes none of us. But the question is, how do we respond to it? We can either look upon it as a challenge or as an opportunity to do something. If you look at India, I think 42% of all our generation capacity now comes from non-fossil fuels. the same number is going to go to more than 50% by the year 2030. I think it's a matter of great pride for a country like India, which has been so heavily dependent on fossil fuels, to wean itself off and to make these significant changes. We continue to hear policies. Just the other day, we heard policies for a rooftop solar, which will not just encourage people to install them on their rooftops, but even the additional power that they would generate, you can sell it back to the electricity boards. This is almost like any advanced European country kind of embracing renewable power and clean energy. I think we need to be proud of these developments. Just take a look at the adoption of electric vehicles. At Tata Motors, for example, more than, I think, we had thought that the sale of electric vehicles would cross the sale of normal IC engine vehicles after maybe 27 or 28 or some such year. But we were wrong. That date has happened much earlier. We just see the rate of adoption. The point is that the acknowledgement of the people that something needs to be done, the support of the policies of the government that make it happen, and of course, you then have businesses kind of backing it up. You bring all the three together and you can see the kind of transformation that happens. I did not imagine, I must say, in my 40 years of working, that the electricity, the power sector, which was perhaps the most vexed sector that this country has, and maybe it is still today vexed, but not as much as what it was earlier. We do distribute electricity in Bombay, in Delhi, in all of Orissa, and I can tell you without a doubt that people are willing to pay as long as you give them good service, and that, I think, is the paradigm that has come here to stay, and we need to feel good about it. So on the energy transition front, I would argue that we as a country have converted this to an opportunity, and I think there is much more to come in the years to follow. The second transition is artificial intelligence. And I think Mr. Gokhale very rightly said that this is a challenge, but as well as maybe an opportunity. I would say that when it comes to artificial intelligence, we perhaps need to do a lot more thinking and understand what does it really mean for us. I don't think corporates are doing enough to self-introspect and to really dig down as to what can it do for us, both good as well as bad. At the moment, it just sounds like a fad. At the moment, you see a weather lady on a television channel explaining weather, an animated version to be, let's say, artificial intelligence. But I was just in the morning talking to a friend of mine, Raj, who's here in the audience, who said that when the Prime Minister, I believe, gave a speech over here in Hindi, it was simultaneously translated in Tamil, and maybe then you can translate into multiple other local languages with the same tone, with the same accent, and I'm pretty sure soon you will have it with the same mannerism and the lip movement, etc. Imagine the power of what technology and all these advancements can do. I think we need to spend a lot more time in understanding this, and of course, clearly the policy formulation and the regulation that goes behind it, as Mr. Gokhale said, is going to be extremely crucial in making this happen. The third transition that I see is the realignment of the global supply chain. And this is indeed a subject close to my heart, but I think, Mr. Gokhale, you kind of took my entire talk away when you said that India needs to embrace manufacturing. I must say, the global supply chain realignment, which we all know, basically, in a nutshell, translates to the world needs an alternative to China as far as manufacturing is concerned. That's the blunt statement of it all. India does offer that opportunity. The global trade in manufacturing of manufactured goods is at $15 trillion. The global trade in services is at $7 trillion. Our share of globally traded manufactured goods is a minuscule less than 1%. Why on earth should we be losing out on this opportunity when we have such strong winds behind us, when the world is telling us, please help us because we want to de-risk ourselves from China for many of the reasons that Mr. Gokhale just articulated a little while earlier. I must say, with due respect to economists, to books that are written on the subject that kind of suggest that we should skip manufacturing, not spend money, simply somehow magically leapfrog into the services related to manufacturing, I would argue that does not reflect a proper understanding of the opportunity and of the process of manufacturing. Before you begin design, before you begin to offer all the services, you've got to start making first. That's the fundamental principle. Let me get upon this a little more, little deeper. Within manufactured goods, electronic goods constitute about $7 trillion of an opportunity. Within electronic goods, smartphones are the single largest factor, the component that there is. The world today wants to come and engage in India and do all these things over here. We've got the world's two largest suppliers very deeply entrenched into this country, further expanding their supply chain. And again, I would question as to why is it that we would not encourage that and embrace it and further deepen the supply chain so that it provides even more opportunities for us as a country and to our people. You can broadly divide electronics manufacturing into two parts. You have what's called EMS, or Electronic Manufacturing Services, which is essentially the mechanical machining of enclosures, the casings and things like that, and the assembly that goes into it. On the face of it, it sounds like a very trivial, low value added, a meaningless sweatshop kind of an impression. Nothing can be farther from the truth. If you are making 100,000 mobile phones in a day, it can employ about 70,000 people. If each one of those phones has over 600 dimensions that need to be checked with an accuracy of less than a micron, if the surface finish of each one of those phones has to be such that it is seen through a microscope of magnification of more than 60 times, ladies and gentlemen, it is not a simple operation. I would invite you to come and visit some of the factories that we have to understand that this is not a simple operation. It is indeed complex. It requires a lot of diligence. It requires a lot of IT backbone to make sure that all the number of CNC machines, we have the largest number of CNC machines working anywhere under one roof to make all of this happen. This is not, as I said, either low value added or any less complex. And we need to embrace it with all our might. Further, I think there's been some suggestion that we're just doing tinkering and there's not enough value added. Whenever you start a new product or a new activity, the first step to start is with final assembly. Because once you see the product, once you feel the product, then the rest of the ecosystem happens by itself or gets encouraged, and slowly but surely it happens. We've seen that happen with the auto sector as well. Those of you who recall, and we go back about 25 or 30 years, that's exactly what happened. And we see that now happening with the smartphone ecosystem. After final assembly came in the manufacturing of the enclosures. We now see plants coming up for making display panels. We now see plants coming up for making cameras. And I'm pretty sure that the other related ecosystem of such as machine tools, tool bits, the chemicals, everything else will follow simply because there is that kind of demand and the opportunity that there is. I would say that I think if you look at this, there is no dearth of opportunity. I don't think there is a dearth of capital. The one thing, yes, that we do need to make sure is that we have people and our workforce that is qualified enough and skilled enough to seize this opportunity. And I would actually underline that as the single most critical factor that lies between us and seizing the opportunity that is ahead of us in such abundance. The second part of the electronics value chain, of course, are semiconductors. That's the holy grail of manufacturing. Requires tremendous amount of capital. We don't have the technology. We will have to buy the technology or partner with somebody. But again, as we all know, any product that you pick up today, anything that you do in your day-to-day life has a chip somewhere over there. I think the nation needs a facility, a plant where we are able to produce and make our own chips. We cannot be dependent on the world perpetually to be reliant on chips. I'm sure when the first steel plant was set up 120 years ago, I don't think there was a business case as to how do you make a steel plant. But it's a requirement of the nation, it has to be done, and therefore we are getting it done. It's not going to be easy, it's going to take time, but someone's got to do it. And therefore I think, along with the government, as you might have read, I think we are getting into it, knowing that it's going to be not a cakewalk, but again, very critical for the nation. And again, I would argue that this would be money well spent because it builds the foundation for what lies ahead of us in terms of opportunity, in terms of the development of the allied kind of sectors and so on and so forth. And we can't do without this. And 10 to 15 years from today, I think we are going to be thanking ourselves that we actually took the trouble to come here and set this up. So if we were to kind of look at what are therefore some of the things that we need to be focused on over the let's say the next decade or so, because I think that's when the window of opportunity is. I would say the first thing to realize, and as I mentioned, I want to emphasize that our biggest strength for us as a country from a business standpoint is our people, is the talent that we have. And we've got to make sure that we nurture this talent, we train this talent, we develop this talent. Here I would go on to make a point that I don't think it's about skills. Skills can be taught fairly quickly. You give me a raw person who's got basic education, I can skill that person within 6 months' time on my shop floor to do the job that I'd like the person to do. But having that basic education to be able to learn new things is critical. And I would therefore argue that more than skills, what is more important is that basic foundation of education. And that is something that we perhaps need to focus on. I would almost go on to say that come elections and all of that, we've all seen the country do so well, prosper, build up phenomenal infrastructure. We've made progress in leaps and bounds. But now perhaps it is time to double down on developing the social infrastructure in terms of education and healthcare, because that, I think, is going to really take our people and give us that competitive advantage as we go ahead. Second, the Indian market is not going to be big enough to fulfill our ambitions of economic growth. The world has to be our marketplace. You talk to any multinational company, the Indian business for any multinational company would be less than 5%. There are very few for whom that business would be more than 5%. So the world has to be our stage. And therefore, for us to work along with all the dimensions that Mr. Gokhale just explained in terms of geopolitics is extremely, extremely important. And that's my third point. I've never seen before the intersection of what business would want so intrinsically linked with geopolitics. No country can do it all. You've got to have partnerships for supply chain, for technology, for components. But with whom do you partner? And that, I think, will ride on the back of the sophistication and the complication that Mr. Gokhale just explained earlier. And therefore, the need for industry as well as government to work together along these dimensions has, I think, become extremely crucial. And I think we in industry better realize that we need to work with the government when we need to make this happen. The fourth, I did speak about the need for education and in healthcare. And this is where perhaps the digital backbone that we have, which I consider to be perhaps the most significant infrastructure development and achievement over the last decade. I would almost say that this is as big and as significant as the Industrial Revolution. It is as powerful. It has the potential of taking things to the next level. We need to leverage this to make sure that we are able to educate our people and we are able to get the access for healthcare to all the people that is required. The last point. I think industry clearly has to play its role. I do belong to the House of Tatas. I feel proud of what we have done and the kind of bets and challenges that we have taken. Thanks a lot to Chandra, of course, whose leadership is, as all of you over here particularly know, is extremely bold. But where is that kind of boldness and courage to take big bets when we are talking about moving a country? We cannot, this is not the time to be incremental. This is not the time to be just tipping one's toes and seeing how does one do it. This is the time to go all in. And I must say, we need to see more of the private sector and industry coming forward to go all in. Let me just sum it up by saying, I think we are almost living presently from a business standpoint, a dream, as I said, where all cylinders seem to be firing. There are a few transitions and challenges that lie ahead. I don't think this is the time for industry to be soft pedaling and being timid about things. This is a time to go all in. And I would simply argue and say that it is an opportunity that lies ahead of us, and it's only for us to lose it. The fault will be entirely ours. Thank you so much indeed.